Clayton Voss knocked on Samuel Rourke's cabin door for the deed with a leather folder under one arm, and Deputy Harlen Pike behind him, as if the county had passed sentence. Samuel opened in a work shirt, one hand trembling, his shoulders bent beneath 69 years. Behind him hung Evelyn's photograph, and beside the stove sat the cedar box holding the Rourke papers. Voss said Samuel had 1 hour to sign before the county seized the cabin, the graves under the pines, and the creek bank his father had left him. Pike rested a hand on his revolver and warned Lottie Mae Carter, watching from the road, to go home. Samuel looked down. A blackwater mussel shell was crushed beneath Voss's polished boot, though those shells lived near the hidden landing. Pike's radio whispered on a private logging frequency, and the survey map showed a fresh crease over the creek road. They had entered by the forbidden route, brought false paper, and set their deadline. Voss mistook silence for fear. He reached toward Evelyn's cedar box, never guessing the old man had found 3 mistakes and needed another. If you enjoy stories where arrogant men discover too late that the old and forgotten were never helpless, leave a like, subscribe, and tell us what state or city you are watching from. Now let's go back to the morning they knocked on Samuel Rourke's cabin door for the deed. The morning had begun 6 hours earlier with Samuel standing barefoot on the back step, listening to the creek breathe beneath a low veil of mist. Blackwater moved without shine through the cypress knees, carrying pine needles, a bottle cap, and one pale feather toward the bend where the old landing disappeared under willow roots. He watched the current, because he always watched it. A man who had spent enough nights on hostile rivers learned that water announced every visitor before a road did. That habit had survived the war, the ship home, Evelyn's patient love, and the years since cancer had taken her out of the chair beside the stove. At 69, Samuel's left knee stiffened before rain. 2 fingers on his right hand sometimes shook, and sleep came in pieces. He cultivated tomatoes, field peas, and okra behind wire that deer could still defeat when they felt determined. He repaired hoop nets for fishermen who paid in cash when they had it, and catfish when they did not. Most people in Bryan County knew him as a quiet widower who had never learned how to need company. That suited him. Silence made room for the sounds that mattered. At 7:10, he heard Lottie Mae Carter's Ford coughing along the county road. At 7:12, the engine quit beside his mailbox. At 7:13, she appeared between the pines carrying a jar of fig preserves and scolding the car as though it were an unreliable nephew. Lottie Mae was 72, small, straight-backed, and dressed for town in a blue cotton dress. She had lived on the adjoining 40 acres since before Samuel married Evelyn. Her husband had been dead 11 years, but she still said we when speaking of the Carter place. She set the preserves on Samuel's table and told him Clayton Voss had bought another parcel south of the bridge. Samuel poured coffee and waited. Lottie said the Danner brothers had signed after Deputy Pike threatened to condemn their well. Old Mr. Colby had lost 12 acres because a surveyor claimed the county map had been copied wrong in 1948. The courthouse called every theft a correction. Voss called each correction progress. He asked about your creek road, Lottie said. Told him there wasn't one. There isn't, Samuel replied. She looked toward the back window. The hidden track from the logging road to the landing had not been used openly since Samuel's father hauled cypress out with mules. Most of it was now 2 ruts under fern and briar. During flood season, it became a narrow channel of mud that joined the creek behind the cabin. A stranger would miss it from the county road. A man planning something would not. Lottie opened her handbag and removed a folded notice. It bore the county seal and informed her that a boundary review might affect adjoining lands. The paper looked official enough to frighten a person who had never spent time around official paper. Samuel read it twice. The type was uneven, and the clerk's signature leaned too smoothly across the carbon copy. More important, the circular stamp showed 13 stars around the county name. The old stamp had 12. Evelyn had noticed that years ago when she volunteered at the tax office during an election. She had laughed over supper and said Bryan County could not count its own stars, but expected everyone else to count their pennies. The replacement stamp with 13 stars had not been ordered until 1974. The notice claimed to certify a 1968 recording. "Did they give you this at the courthouse?" Samuel asked. "Pike brought it after dark." "Anyone see him?" "My porch light did." Samuel folded the notice along its existing crease and handed it back. "Keep it dry. Don't sign anything." Lottie studied him. "You expecting somebody?" Samuel glanced toward the creek. A gray heron lifted from the hidden landing, crossed the water low, and vanished upstream. A heron left that way when disturbed from behind. "I am now." He moved through the cabin without hurry. Evelyn Rourke's cedar box sat near the stove, where it had sat for 32 years. It held tax receipts, marriage papers, a copy of the deed, and letters tied with green ribbon. The original deed was elsewhere. Evelyn had insisted on that after a courthouse fire destroyed records in another county. "Paper can burn," she had said. "Memory can lie. Keep one truth where greedy hands won't look." Beneath the storm cellar steps, inside a sealed metal tube, the original deed rested with a survey drawn by Samuel's father and witnessed by two men long dead. Samuel checked the cellar without opening the tube. He checked the small marine radio in the boathouse, the wire antenna running through an old pecan tree, and the battery he kept charged by habit. Then he returned to the kitchen and took down a tobacco tin from the cupboard. Inside lay a tarnished trident, a Vietnam service photograph, two medals he never displayed, and a strip of waterproof paper bearing 4 call signs. Ray Mercer's was the second. Samuel closed the tin before Lottie could see. She had known he served in the Navy. Almost no one in Bryan County knew the rest. He placed the tin behind a loose board above the bedroom window, not because he feared discovery, but because some truths changed the way men behaved around you, and he needed the men coming that morning to behave exactly as they believed they could. At 8:21, a vehicle stopped on the old logging road behind the property. The county road remained empty. Samuel heard doors close, 3 in quick sequence and a 4th after a pause. Men trying to move quietly often waited too long before making the last sound. He watched through a crack in the back shutter. Clayton Voss emerged first, polished shoes already muddy. Deputy Harlen Pike followed in uniform. Behind them came Harlan Crow, broad through the chest despite his gray hair, and a younger enforcer whose right hand never left his coat pocket. Voss checked a gold pocket watch. Pike lifted his radio and spoke too softly for words to carry. But the band chatter that answered was not the sheriff's dispatch. It was the frequency used by timber crews working Voss's leased tracks along the Tallahatchie line. Samuel knew because fishermen sometimes complained that the crews drowned out weather reports. He had now seen enough to understand the shape of the morning. They wanted the land fast. They had entered where no honest survey party would enter. They expected the deputy's badge and the courthouse seal to close every question. Samuel told Lottie to leave by the front road. "And let them find me halfway home," she asked. "Let them see you go. Then turn at the church and call Mara Ellison from Reverend Cole's office." Lottie's eyes sharpened. Mara had retired from the county records room 3 years earlier, after refusing to backdate a filing for one of Voss's shell companies. She now lived 20 miles north and spent her mornings listening to amateur radio while caring for her sister. "What do I tell her?" Lottie asked. "Tell her Evelyn remembered 13 stars." The knock came before Lottie reached the porch. Not a neighbor's knock, not a lost traveler's, but 3 hard blows meant to establish ownership of the door. Samuel opened it, and the morning narrowed to Voss's folder, Pike's badge, Crow's watchful face, and the younger man's hidden hand. The scene unfolded exactly as it would later be remembered. Clayton Voss knocked on Samuel Rourke's cabin door for the deed, certain an old widower could be frightened out of his inheritance. In time, the county newspaper would put a harsher sentence above the truth. They knocked on his cabin door for the deed, not knowing a Vietnam Navy SEAL lived inside. But in that moment, Voss knew only what age had done to Samuel's body. He did not know what discipline had preserved in Samuel's mind. Voss stepped across the threshold without invitation and reached toward Evelyn's cedar box. Samuel moved only half a pace, enough to place his body between the man's hand and the lid. It was not a dramatic motion. His knee complained, and the tremor in his fingers was visible. Yet Voss stopped. Some people recognized a boundary only when they felt one. "Family records," Samuel said. "Then you won't mind proving which ones are yours." Voss opened the leather folder on the kitchen table. He arranged the papers with careful fingertips, preserving the picture of a businessman inconvenienced by rural confusion. The first sheet was a survey plat showing Samuel's west line shifted nearly 200 yards toward the creek. The second claimed unpaid county assessments on the disputed strip. The third was a quitclaim deed prepared for Samuel's signature. On paper, surrender looked tidy. Voss tapped the signature line. "This protects you from seizure proceedings. Sign, and I may allow you to remain in the cabin through winter." Lottie made a sound that was almost a laugh. Pike turned on her. "Ma'am, you were told to leave." "I was told plenty by men whose mothers should have done a better job." The younger enforcer took one step off the porch. Samuel looked at Lottie, then at the road. She understood. Anger left her face, replaced by the mild confusion older women sometimes used as armor. She gathered her handbag, apologized to nobody, and walked toward her Ford. Crow watched her go. Pike watched Samuel. Voss watched his pocket watch. The younger man watched the cedar box. 4 men, 4 concerns. Only Crow kept checking the back window. Samuel bent over the survey. A fresh crease ran from the old logging road to the hidden landing, flattening the blue contour marks. Someone had folded the map to keep that route visible in a coat pocket. The printed scale was correct, but the surveyor's certification used a license number Samuel had seen on a notice nailed to the feed store. The surveyor had died the previous spring. Samuel turned to the deed copy. The notary line carried the 13-star stamp, supposedly affixed in 1968. Under the table, a crust of black shell fell from Voss's sole and landed beside a chair leg. Samuel placed his boot over it before Pike saw him notice. "Who showed you the west marker?" he asked. Voss's smile narrowed. "County records showed us everything necessary." "That wasn't my question. Your questions no longer matter." Pike unclipped a pair of handcuffs and set them on the table. The gesture was meant to make metal speak where law could not. "Obstructing a lawful survey can put you in a cell," he said. "At your age, Sam, a night on concrete might be hard." Samuel raised his eyes. Pike was younger than the war by 10 years, thick around the waist, with sweat gathering under his hatband though the cabin was cool. The deputy's radio gave another short burst. A man's voice said, "Bridge clear until 4. Pike turned the volume down too late. Samuel had his 4th mistake. The 1-hour deadline was theater. The real deadline was the courthouse closing, and the bridge was being watched to prevent anyone from reaching it. 1 hour, Voss repeated. At 9:30, my patience ends. County closes at 5. Your situation closes sooner. Samuel lifted the quitclaim deed. The paper smelled faintly of fresh toner and pipe smoke. This says I appeared before Notary Public Ellis Broom on Monday. Routine language. Ellis Broom buried his wife Monday. Whole church saw him there. For the first time, the younger enforcer looked at Voss. Crow did not. Crow kept watching Samuel. Voss took the sheet back. You have become confused, Mr. Rourke. I am offering mercy. Mercy doesn't usually bring 3 guns. Pike slammed a palm on the table, making Evelyn's coffee cup jump in its saucer. Careful. Samuel's voice was soft. Pike stared at him, surprised less by the word than by the absence of fear behind it. For one moment, rain tapped the tin roof, though the sky outside still held only thin clouds. It was memory, not weather. Samuel heard another roof in another country, Hard rain on corrugated steel above prisoners tied in a riverside hut. He smelled diesel, wet canvas, and the sour mud of the Delta. Ray Mercer crouched beside him in darkness, whispering that the river had risen faster than the chart promised. Samuel pushed the memory down before it could complete itself. The present had 4 armed men, 1 vulnerable neighbor, and a legal lie that needed witnesses. The past could explain his pulse later. It could not be allowed to command his hands now. "I'll read it," Samuel said. Voss smiled again. "You have 56 minutes. Pike reached for Samuel's truck keys hanging beside the door. "To keep you from making an unwise trip." He pocketed them. Then he removed the telephone receiver from its cradle, pulled the cord loose from the wall, and let it fall. "Storm damage," he said. "Happens all the time." The younger enforcer opened the cedar box before Samuel could cross the room. He pawed through Evelyn's letters, lifted the copy of the deed, and tossed a photograph onto the floor. It showed Evelyn on the cabin steps in 1952, one hand on her hip, laughing at Samuel because he had set a window crooked. The glass cracked beneath the enforcer's boot. Samuel felt the old violent certainty rise from a place he had spent 15 years burying. The body remembered how quickly distance could disappear. The mind remembered what came after. Ray's empty bunk, Evelyn washing blood from Samuel's knuckles when he woke fighting a dream. A promise made beside her hospital bed that no frightened man would ever again decide who Samuel became. He knelt slowly and picked up the photograph. "That cost you," he said. The younger man grinned. "What, $5? More than you can pay." Crow shifted near the door. His gaze settled on Samuel's hands, not the trembling fingers, but the way they protected the broken glass without cutting the photograph. Something troubled him. Voss told the men to search the cabin for original records. Pike protested that they had no warrant, then smiled at his own joke. Samuel sat at the table and read every page while they opened cupboards, shook out bedding, and prodded the walls. He let them believe stillness meant defeat. In truth, each minute they remained inside increased the number of acts Mara could name later. The younger man found the loose board above the bedroom window. He pulled out the tobacco tin and called to Pike. The deputy opened it at the kitchen table. The tarnished trident lay in his palm. Beneath it was a photograph of 6 young men in dark uniforms beside a river craft, their faces lean and sunburned, their eyes older than their skin. On the back, in Evelyn's handwriting, were the words "Samuel and the team, 1969. Come home whole." Pike looked from the photograph to Samuel. "You steal this from somebody?" Samuel did not answer. Crow came closer. He took the photograph without permission and held it near the window. His face changed. "I seen him," he said. Voss remained focused on the deed. "You see old sailors every day." "Not him." Crow pointed to Samuel's younger face, then to a man standing at his shoulder. There was an article in the veterans' paper. "River rescue down south. Prison camp. One of the team died." Samuel's gaze moved to the name scratched beneath the second man. Ray Mercer. Crow swallowed. "This is Rourke." The younger enforcer laughed, but it came out thin. Pike put the trident down as if it had grown sharp. Voss finally looked at Samuel with full attention. "A decorated old man is still an old man." "That's right," Samuel said. "And a forged deed is still forged." The rain that had existed only in his memory began for real, a few heavy drops striking the roof. Voss checked his watch again. 43 minutes. "You're worried about 4 o'clock, not 9:30. Samuel nodded toward Pike's radio. "Bridge clear until 4. Pike's face reddened. Voss closed the folder. His polished manner did not disappear. It tightened. "Search the cellar." Samuel's expression remained empty, but inside him the morning changed shape. The original deed lay beneath those steps. More than land was now at risk. If they found the tube, Voss could destroy the last clean record before Mara ever saw the false one. Crow moved toward the rear door. Samuel watched the rain strengthen over the creek and knew he had to act before the men understood why water mattered. Samuel rose before Crow reached the back door. He carried Evelyn's cracked photograph to the mantel and set it upright against the clock. "Cellar floods when the creek rises," he said. "Door sticks. I'll open it." Pike blocked him. "Crow can manage. Then Crow can break his back on the third step. Rotted last winter." Crow looked at Samuel, uncertain whether the warning was concern or calculation. Voss motioned for Samuel to lead. That was the fifth mistake, allowing the man who knew the house to choose the order in which they entered it. The storm cellar lay under a sloping hatch behind the kitchen. Samuel lifted the iron ring and pulled. Damp earth breathed up from below. He descended slowly, favoring his knee, while Pike held a flashlight over his shoulder and Crow followed. The younger enforcer remained with Lottie's retreating figure in sight, and Voss stayed above with the folder. Samuel counted the steps without looking. On the seventh, he let his boot slip. His shoulder struck the wall, the flashlight beam jumped, and Pike cursed as he caught the rail. In that one dark second, Samuel pressed his thumb against a loose square of wood below the fifth tread. The sealed tube rolled soundlessly into an old drain channel built when the cabin had no indoor plumbing. Rainwater already trickled there. The tube traveled beneath the foundation toward a stone outlet hidden by mint and blackberry vines. Samuel had built the channel with Evelyn before they understood how often a home needed more than one way to preserve what mattered. By the time Pike steadied the light, Samuel was on one knee, looking old and embarrassed. "Told you it sticks," he said. Crow descended past him. The cellar held canned beans, kerosene, seed sacks, tools, and a wooden trunk containing winter blankets. The men opened everything. Pike drove his boot through one of Evelyn's preserve jars and watched peaches spill into the dirt. Samuel measured his breathing. Violence would have been easy for 3 seconds. Evidence required longer. Crow tapped the underside of the stairs and found only damp boards. "Nothing," he said. Voss called down that time was passing. Samuel climbed last. At the top, he saw the younger enforcer returning from the road alone. "Old lady's car wouldn't start," the man said. "She walked toward the church." "Go bring her back," Voss ordered. Samuel turned his head. "She has nothing to do with my deed. Then she has nothing to fear." Voss's eyes said the opposite. The younger man took Pike's patrol car. Tires threw wet gravel as he sped away. Samuel imagined Lottie on the road, blue dress darkening in rain, hearing the engine behind her. His plan had assumed she would reach the church before anyone followed. Assumptions killed more men than bullets. Ray had once said that while checking a river chart under red light. Samuel had remembered it every day since failing to remember it once. "I'll sign," he said. Voss studied him. Pike smiled with open relief. Crow didn't either. "But the land description is wrong," Samuel continued. "If I sign that, your own clerk may reject it. My father's marker is at the north bend. Let me show you." Voss shook his head. "You will sign what is prepared. Then you may own nothing but a lawsuit. The old survey begins at an iron pin beside a split cypress. Your paper begins at a stone that washed out in 1961. The claim was partly true. Old deeds in Creek country relied on trees, stones, and water lines that had moved for generations. Voss knew enough to fear an ambiguity he had not manufactured. He opened the folder again and scanned the description. "Where is the pin?" "Past the boathouse." Crow looked toward the window. Rain sheeted over the yard now, silver against the pines. "Creek's coming up." "It always comes up," Samuel said. Voss checked his watch. "Pike, take him. Crow, go with them. Verify the marker and bring him back. 10 minutes." Samuel put on his old canvas coat. Pike kept his truck keys and his telephone remained dead, but neither man objected when he took a coil of net line from a peg. To them, it was the harmless habit of a fisherman who might find work on the way. In the boathouse, beneath overturned baskets and a rusted lantern, the radio waited. The original deed tube would soon emerge from the drain outlet behind the mint bed, float into a narrow ditch, and lodge against a wire basket Samuel used to catch leaves. If the water rose too fast, it might pass the basket and enter the creek. He had chosen preservation over possession, but the current did not care about intentions. Pike walked close behind him with one hand on his sidearm. Crow carried no visible weapon, though the weight beneath his coat pulled one side lower. They crossed the muddy yard. Samuel saw patrol car tracks on the county road and Lottie's Ford still at the mailbox. No blue dress, no younger enforcer. That could mean she had reached the church. It could mean she had not. At the boathouse, Samuel paused as if winded. He leaned against the doorframe and listened. Beneath the hammer of rain came the quiet rush of water through the drain. Then, a metallic tap. The tube had reached the basket. One danger had moved. The others had not. "Marker," Pike said. Samuel pointed beyond the boathouse toward the cypress trail. "Another 100 yards." Crow stared at the rivercraft photograph still in his mind. "What unit were you?" he asked. Pike told him to shut up. Samuel stepped inside the boathouse, ostensibly to take a lantern. His hand passed under a shelf and turned the marine radio switch. Static filled the small room. Pike entered at once. "What's that?" "Storm band." "Turn it off." Samuel adjusted the dial a fraction. At 9:02 every morning, Mara Ellison listened on a local amateur frequency for her sister's medication reminder from a friend in Greenwood. Samuel and Mara had never served together, but after Evelyn died, Mara sometimes relayed flood warnings to residents along the creek. Samuel had once taught her an old river signal used to indicate a compromised landing. 3 short clicks, 1 long, 2 short. He had called it a piece of useless history. Mara had said history was rarely useless when men wanted records forgotten. Samuel pressed the microphone without speaking. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short. Pike tore the cord from his hand. "I set off." "You did." The radio continued to hiss on battery power. Crow looked at the dial. "Was that code?" Samuel picked up the lantern. "Could have been lightning." Pike struck him across the mouth. The blow drove Samuel against a workbench. Pain flashed white through his jaw. He tasted blood. His knee nearly folded, and for a terrible instant, his body was only what Voss believed it to be. Old, damaged, too slow. Crow caught his arm before he fell. Samuel saw shame cross the man's face, then disappear behind fear. Pike grabbed the microphone. "Anyone answer?" Static. He tore the antenna lead free, and the radio went quiet. "Now it's storm damage." Samuel wiped his lip. The signal might have reached Mara. It might have died in the rain. A SEAL learned never to build a plan around a message he could not confirm. "Marker," Pike said again. They followed the flooded trail into the cypress. Water reached Samuel's boot soles, then his ankles. He knew every root beneath it. Pike did not. Crow moved carefully, watching Samuel place his feet. At the north bend, the split cypress leaned over black water. The iron pin stood 6 feet inland, almost hidden by sedge. Samuel cleared mud from its top. Pike examined it with no understanding. Crow crouched and found an old stamped number. "This is real," he said. "So is my deed. Maybe Voss's survey man missed it." "Voss's survey man is dead." Crow's face hardened. "You trying to turn me?" "I'm telling you what ground you're standing on." A radio crackled beneath Pike's rain cape. The younger enforcer's voice broke through. "Got the woman. Bringing her back." Samuel's hands went still. Pike smiled. Looks like your witness didn't make church. He raised the radio. Keep her dry. Mr. Voss may need her signature too. Samuel looked downstream. The creek surface had changed from flat black to moving brown, carrying twigs in quick circles. A storm surge was coming from the upper drainage. The hidden landing would flood first, then the trail, then the low road where Voss's men had parked. Samuel had perhaps 40 minutes before water erased tracks and made the creek road impassable. Voss had perhaps 7 hours before the courthouse closed. The mismatch told Samuel something. Voss did not intend merely to obtain a signature. He intended to file a deed that day, and he needed Samuel contained until the record changed. We go back, Pike said. On the return path, Crow whispered low enough that the rain swallowed his words. Article said you pulled 9 prisoners out. 8. Said one of your men drowned. Samuel saw Ray again, not drowning but standing waist-deep beside a reed bank, grinning because the prisoners had mistaken his bad Vietnamese for a prayer. The memory shifted to gunfire, a burning hut, and Ray caught beneath a collapsing dock while Samuel chose to move the prisoners to the boat. He had gone back. He had gone back too late. Articles make clean lines out of dirty nights, Samuel said. You kill many, Crow asked. Enough to know killing doesn't fix paper. Crow looked away. He was not becoming good. He was discovering that the old man he had agreed to frighten carried a history Crow could neither predict nor control. Fear made men useful, but never trustworthy. When they reached the cabin, Lottie sat in Evelyn's chair with her wrist tied in front of her. The younger enforcer stood behind her. Rainwater ran from her hair onto her blue dress. One cheek was red. Voss had moved the cedar box to the table and stacked Evelyn's letters beside it, as though preparing kindling. Your neighbor interfered with county business, he said. Samuel entered without haste. Lottie met his eyes and gave the smallest shake of her head. She had not reached Mara by telephone. Whether the radio signal had, neither of them knew. Voss laid a matchbook atop Evelyn's letters. The deed, Mr. Rourke. The real one. Or the county may lose a cabin to faulty wiring before lunch. Pike closed the door behind Samuel. Thunder rolled across the pines. Somewhere beyond the north bend, the rising creek struck a fallen tree with a sound like a distant door being forced. Samuel looked at Lottie, at the matchbook, at the broken photograph, and at Voss's polished boot. A fragment of blackwater shell remained embedded in the heel. The clue was still present. The question was whether anyone lawful would arrive before the rain washed every other truth away. 20 miles north, Mara Ellison heard 6 pulses buried in storm static. She was at her kitchen table comparing the boundary notice Lottie had shown her with old county forms. 3 short clicks, 1 long, 2 short. Samuel had demonstrated that river warning once beside the boathouse. It meant a landing had been compromised. He had told her that if he ever sent it in earnest, she should examine the records before looking for him. Mara called the Bryan County Sheriff's Office and heard Pike's recorded voice saying the sheriff was at a conference in Jackson. She called a former colleague at State Records, requested the Rourke Index, then left with her receiver, camera, and the copied notice in a plastic sleeve. Samuel knew none of this. In the cabin, he saw only Lottie tied to Evelyn's chair, Voss's matchbook resting on Evelyn's letters, and water rising under the floorboards. Let her go, he said. Bring me the original deed, Voss replied. Pike's radio crackled. A voice said the bridge remained clear. Another asked whether the papers at the landing were dry. Voss silenced the set too late. The phrase confirmed what Samuel had suspected. The hidden landing held more than a route. It held records Voss could not risk exposing. Samuel nodded toward the false deed. Your description leaves out the high water oak. A clerk compares that to my original. She rejects it. My clerk files what I tell her, Voss said. The admission had no lawful witness. The radio in the boathouse was damaged, and Samuel did not know whether Mara had heard his code. He needed time, evidence, and Lottie out of the younger enforcer's shaking hands. "The original is in a sealed tube," he said. "Storm water moved it through the cellar drain." Pike laughed. Voss did not. "Where does the drain end?" "Boathouse ditch." Voss ordered everyone outside. Lottie's wrists were tied to Samuel's by a length of cord. Crow stayed near her. The younger man carried a kerosene can and his revolver. Before leaving, Voss tore one of Evelyn's letters in half. Samuel recognized the green ink. Evelyn had written it during his last deployment. "Come home with whatever parts of yourself you can carry. We will learn the rest together." He folded the pieces into his pocket and followed them into the rain. Brown water streamed through the mint bed. The sealed tube had lodged in Samuel's wire leaf basket exactly as he hoped. He let his gaze pass over it. Crow noticed but said nothing. Inside the boathouse, Pike found the portable cassette recorder Samuel used years ago to capture bird calls for Evelyn. Its reels had turned only a little. Pike ripped out the tape and crushed it beneath his boot. Voss watched Samuel, waiting for despair. Samuel gave him none. A second machine, old and silent, still turned inside a flare tin on the upper shelf. It had recorded Pike's blow, the order to seize Lottie, and Voss's claim that the clerk obeyed him. Samuel had started it when he sent the radio code. He did not know how long the battery would last. Crow lifted the sealed tube from the ditch. Voss opened it and found the original deed, Samuel's father's survey, and old tax receipts wrapped in plastic. The high-water oak and iron pin established that Samuel owned the landing and logging track. Voss held the real deed above the current. "Sign mine, and this stays dry." "You need it dry," Samuel said. "A burned original brings state examiners. Whoever is paying for your landing won't pay for questions." Crow looked at Voss. The younger man stopped smiling. Pike's radio mentioned papers at the landing again. "You talk too much," Samuel said. Thunder shook the boathouse. The old marine set sputtered once, then died as flood water reached its cable junction. Their only known link to Mara was gone. Voss placed the quitclaim on the workbench. "Sign." Lottie lifted her chin. "Mara knows about the stamp." It was a bluff. She had not reached the church. Pike's face betrayed him. "Ellison has friends in state records," he said. "We file now." Voss ordered the group to the hidden landing. Samuel read the decision clearly. Voss wanted the landing cleared, the deed filed, and both witnesses contained before the storm passed. Too many objectives were pressing together. Pressure made arrogant men choose badly. They entered the flooded cypress trail. Lottie still tied to Samuel. Water climbed to their calves. Samuel watched leaves, foam, and needles along the roots. The main surge was close. Pike used a flashlight in the dim rain. Voss carried both deeds under his coat. Crow walked behind Samuel, and the younger enforcer guarded Lottie with the revolver. "Article said you saved prisoners in a flood," Crow murmured. "8, Samuel said. "And Mercer." "Didn't come home." Crow fell silent. He had not become honorable. He was only beginning to understand that Voss had hired him for a crime larger than intimidation. At the landing, 2 trucks sat under camouflage netting, their tires sunk in creek mud. Untaxed liquor filled crates beside county files and payment envelopes. Fresh timber bearing another company's mark lay on a barge. Duplicate deeds were stacked in a metal case with the county seal. Voss had not discovered Samuel's route that morning. He had been using it for months. The blackwater shell beneath his boot was the trace of repeated trespass. "Now you understand," Voss said. "I understand why you need me gone." Pike's radio crackled. A bridge watcher reported a state vehicle headed south, driven by a woman. "Ellison," Pike said. Voss ordered the bridge closed. Static answered. Then Pike's own radio gave 3 short clicks, 1 long and 2 short. Mara had heard Samuel's warning. More important, she had repeated it on Voss's private frequency. proving the hidden channel was no longer hidden. Voss looked at Samuel, and for the first time his polished certainty broke. "What did you do?" Samuel listened to the rising creek and the frightened men around him. "I gave the water a witness," he said. The younger enforcer raised his revolver toward Samuel, but Voss knocked the barrel aside. "Not here. Not yet." That single correction told Samuel, who still feared murder, and who merely feared being caught near it. Pike barked into the radio for the bridgemen to detain Mara, then received only the coded clicks again. The private channel carried a new voice, firm and unfamiliar, identifying the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation and ordering all county personnel to stand down. Pike switched channels, found the sheriff's band, and shouted that armed trespassers had taken hostages at Rourke's Landing. He was trying to build legal cover while standing among stolen timber, liquor crates, forged deeds, and a kidnapped woman. The absurdity might have been comic in another life. In this one, Pike still wore a badge, and badges could make lies travel faster than truth. Voss grabbed Lottie by the cord and pulled her toward a flat-bottomed skiff tied beside the barge. "We move now." Crow looked at the flood. "Southcut's boiling." Then Rourke pilots. Pike shoved Samuel toward the boat. The old man's knee buckled against the gunwale. Pain shot up his thigh. Lottie cried out as the cord jerked her wrist. Samuel stayed down for one breath, palm against wet wood, feeling the skiff rise and fall. The surge had arrived. Water pushed sideways beneath the hull in heavy pulses. He remembered another river lifting a craft against bamboo stakes while Ray called distance through rain. He remembered 8 prisoners huddled low, one with a childlike grip on Samuel's sleeve. He remembered choosing the living in front of him while Ray vanished behind smoke. The guilt had spent 14 years telling him that choosing was betrayal. Evelyn had spent those same years telling him a man could not honor the dead by joining them in every dream. Samuel rose. "Untie her from me," he said. "She sits in the middle." Voss refused. Samuel pointed to the cord. "One of us falls. Both go. You lose your signature and your witness. Put her between Crow and the bow." Voss looked at the water, then ordered Crow to separate them. Lottie's wrist remained bound, but she was no longer attached to Samuel. Crow helped her into the skiff and seated himself beside her. The younger enforcer climbed near the stern. Pike stayed on the landing to radio the bridgemen. Voss entered last with the deed folder tucked under his coat and a pistol visible in his hand. Samuel took the tiller of the small outboard. He had no intention of fleeing down the Southcut. He needed time, separation, and a place where Pike's badge could not control what witnesses saw. He pulled the starter cord twice. The engine coughed and died. The younger man pressed the revolver against Samuel's shoulder. Again. Samuel tried once more. The motor caught, rattling above the storm. He guided the skiff away from the landing. Behind them, Pike shouted into the radio as flood water climbed over his boots. Ahead, the Cypress Trail and the Southcut diverged around a drowned island. Voss pointed left. "Cut." Samuel steered right. "What are you doing?" "Current took the marker tree. Right channel rejoins below." It did not in flood season. The right channel curved behind the cabin and past the boathouse before returning to the creek. Voss could not see that through rain. Crow could. He had followed Samuel to the north pin and recognized the leaning cypress. He said nothing. The boat entered the flooded woods. Branches scraped the gunnels. Water that looked still carried them faster than the motor. Samuel used only small corrections, reading foam, leaves, and the angle of submerged grass. The younger enforcer grew more frightened with every dark tree that seemed to move past them. "We're turning around." "Shore's behind you," Samuel said. "Jump if you prefer." Lottie looked at Samuel's back. She understood the route when the cabin roof appeared through the pines. So did Voss. "You lied. You brought the map." Voss struck Samuel with the pistol. The blow opened the skin above his ear. The skiff veered. Crow grabbed Lottie as she slid. The younger man fired into the air, whether from panic or intent no one could tell. The shot rolled through the flooded woods. Samuel corrected the boat without looking back. "Do that again," he said, "and every state man north of the bridge follows the sound." "They won't reach us," Voss said. Yet he turned toward the noise of engines on the county road. Samuel guided the skiff into the boathouse through doors the rising creek had pushed open. The floor was under 6 inches of water. The hidden cassette still turned inside the flare tin, protected on the upper shelf. The old radio remained dark. Samuel killed the engine. "Why stop?" Voss demanded. "Deadfall across the channel ahead. We portage or wait." This was true. A pine had fallen during the first thunderclap, its crown blocking the narrow water path back to the creek. Samuel had seen the top branches from the landing. The geography had closed behind Voss, not through a trap, but through a storm he had been too arrogant to read. Voss stepped onto the flooded floor and pulled Lottie after him. Crow followed. The younger man remained in the boat, revolver moving between shadows. Samuel stood beside the radio cabinet. Water climbed around his boots. "Sign here," Voss said, spreading the quitclaim on the highest bench. "Now." Ink won't hold on wet paper. Voss placed the original deed beneath it as a writing surface. "Then keep it dry." Samuel took the pen. He looked at the signature line, then at the hidden microphone opening in the cabinet. "Before I sign, say what happens to Lottie." "She goes home." "And the cabin?" "Belongs to my company." "And the landing?" "None of your concern." "The clerk files before 5. Voss leaned close. "My clerk files what I tell her. Pike certifies that you signed willingly. The old deed burns. The storm takes the cabin. By tomorrow, your concern is over." His words were clear. The hidden cassette reels turned. Crow heard them too. His face had gone gray. "You said nobody got hurt," he told Voss. "I said nobody important." Lottie stared at Crow. "You were willing enough when it was only old people losing homes." Crow lowered his eyes. He had no defense, and the story did not offer him one. Outside, Pike's voice came through the storm. He had followed the flooded path on foot, and now stood at the boathouse entrance, soaked, furious, pistol drawn. "State investigators are at the bridge. We burn this place and take the creek." Voss snatched the pen from Samuel. "Hold his hand." The younger enforcer climbed from the skiff. Crow did not move. Pike aimed at him. "Do what you're paid for." Crow stepped toward Samuel, then stopped when the radio cabinet clicked. The old Marine set had found a trace of power from its backup battery. Static rose, broke, and carried Mara Ellison's voice. "Samuel Rourke, this is Mara. State officers have the North Road. Wildlife agents are approaching by river. Preserve the original deed. Repeat, preserve the original deed." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Pike fired at the radio. The cabinet splintered. Lottie ducked. The shot ruptured the lantern's fuel reservoir, and flame ran across the wet bench in a thin, bright line. The younger enforcer dropped the kerosene can. It struck the floor without opening, but he stumbled backward into the skiff. Voss grabbed the original deed and the quitclaim. Pike seized Lottie by the shoulder. Samuel moved. Later, officers would ask Crow exactly how the old man crossed the space. Crow could only say Samuel had been bent one moment and between Pike and Lottie the next. There was no flourish, no impossible display of strength. Samuel struck Pike's gun hand against the doorframe, turned Lottie behind the cypress post, and allowed Pike's own forward rush to carry him into the floodwater outside. The pistol disappeared beneath the brown surface. Samuel's knee failed immediately afterward. He caught the post and stayed upright by will. Crow pulled Lottie farther from the flame. The younger enforcer aimed at Samuel, but his shaking hand found Crow and Lottie in the same line. He could not fire without risking them. Voss ran for the skiff with the deeds. "Stop him!" Pike shouted from the water. The younger man jumped aboard. Voss shoved the boat away from the floor and started the motor. The deadfall blocked the forward channel, so he reversed toward the flooded yard. He did not understand that the outgoing surge crossed the yard toward the ditch and the main creek. The skiff swung broadside. Its stern struck a submerged fence post. Voss fell overboard, still clutching the folder. The younger enforcer dropped the revolver and grabbed the gunwale. The boat spun out through the doors without Voss. Samuel saw the leather folder surface once near the mint bed. He saw Voss surface farther away, coat dragging him down. Pike crawled onto a root, shouting that Voss could not swim. Flames spread up the dry side of the workbench despite rain blowing through the doors. Smoke rolled under the roof. Lottie called Samuel's name. He had a choice that required no thought and carried 15 years of pain. The deeds were drifting toward the ditch. Voss was drifting toward the creek. Saving either might allow the other to vanish. On the Delta, Samuel had chosen prisoners over Ray because 8 lives were in reach and 1 friend was behind fire. He had punished himself for the arithmetic ever since. Now he understood what Evelyn had tried to teach him. Moral restraint was not the absence of judgment. It was the refusal to let hatred decide whose life counted. "Crow, get Lottie out the side door," he said. "Take the cassette from the flare tin." Crow stared. "What cassette?" "Upper shelf. Move." Samuel entered the water. The current seized his legs. His injured knee folded, and for 2 yards he went under. Blackwater filled his ears. Rain on the surface sounded like distant gunfire. He came up beside the mint bed, caught a vine, and reached the folder first. The leather flap had opened. The false deed floated free, ink bleeding. The original remained inside its plastic wrap. Samuel pushed the folder onto a high root where it lodged above the current. Then he let go and moved toward Voss. The land buyer surfaced, coughed, and clawed at Samuel's coat. Panic gave him strength without direction. Samuel turned him toward the cypress roots and kept both their heads above water. He did not explain how. He did not think about technique. He listened to the current, waited for its pull to ease behind a trunk, and moved when the water allowed. Voss sobbed that he did not want to die. "Neither did Ray," Samuel said, though Voss could not hear over thunder. A state wildlife boat appeared beyond the pines, its searchlight cutting through rain. Mara's voice carried from the bow, directing agents toward the boathouse. Samuel raised one arm. The light found him and Voss against the cypress. 2 agents pulled Voss aboard first, then Samuel. On the flooded yard, state investigators disarmed Pike as he tried to reclaim authority. He shouted that Samuel had attacked a deputy. Mara stepped from a second boat holding Lottie's copied notice in a plastic evidence sleeve. "Then you can explain why your 1968 certification bears a stamp manufactured in 1974, she said. Pike looked toward Voss for rescue. Voss lay coughing under an agent's blanket, wrists already secured. The younger enforcer had grounded the skiff against a pine and surrendered when officers surrounded him. Crow stood beside Lottie with the unbroken hidden cassette in his hand. Smoke poured from the boathouse, but rain and floodwater kept the fire from reaching the cabin. "He recorded them," Crow said. Voss admitted the clerk, the filing, and the fire. Mara accepted the cassette without praising him. "You will make that statement again under oath." "I will." "It won't erase what you did." Crow nodded. He knew. Lottie, wrists newly freed, crossed the water to Samuel. Blood ran down the side of his face, and his breath came shallow. "You went after him," she said, looking at Voss. "Had to." "No, you didn't." Samuel watched agents retrieve the leather folder from the root. "That's why I had to." Mara knelt beside Voss's boot while an investigator photographed it. Embedded in the heel were 2 black fragments and the pale inner curve of a mussel shell. "Blackwater mussel," she said. Only bed in this reach is behind Rourke's hidden landing. He claimed in his filing affidavit he had never entered the property before today's lawful survey. Samuel touched the crusted fragment in his own pocket, the one he had covered beneath the kitchen table and collected while Voss searched the bedroom. Mara placed it in an evidence envelope. Its broken edge matched the piece in Voss's heel closely enough to show both came from the same crushed shell. The clue alone would not convict a man. Joined to the tire impressions under camouflage netting, the private radio traffic, the illegal county stamp, the stolen timber, the liquor crates, the forged deeds, and Voss's recorded admission, it closed a chain he had believed water would wash away. Pike's radio clicked once more. The state officer on the bridge reported that the watchers had been detained with county files in their truck. The clerk at the courthouse had instructions to file Samuel's quitclaim at 412 using a signature page that was still blank. She was now speaking with investigators. Pike sat down in the mud. Without the badge's protection, he seemed smaller, just a frightened man in a wet uniform. Samuel felt no triumph. Fear stripped of authority was still fear, and fear could become dangerous. An agent secured Pike's hands and led him toward the road. Voss turned his head from the boat. He looked at Samuel as though seeing him for the first time. Not as an old widower, not as a legend from a veteran's paper, but as the man who had preserved the evidence, protected the hostage, saved the criminal, and left judgment to witnesses. "Why didn't you let me drown?" Voss asked. Samuel's answer was quiet. "Because then you'd escape the courthouse." The state boat carried Voss away through the route he had planned to use for stolen timber and bribe money. By dusk, the hidden landing was no longer hidden. Searchlights moved among the cypress. Cameras recorded every crate, file, tire mark, shell bed, and forged seal before the creek could rearrange the scene. The land had become what Voss feared most, a witness that could be entered into evidence. The investigation lasted longer than the storm. State officers remained through the night, working under portable lights while rain weakened to a whisper. They removed boxes of forged deeds from the landing, matched payoff envelopes to county accounts, and traced the private logging frequency to radios purchased through one of Voss's companies. The courthouse clerk confessed that Pike had delivered prepared signature pages and ordered her to file them before closing. She did not become innocent by confessing. Neither did Harlan Crow. His statement in the cassette helped establish kidnapping, arson conspiracy, land fraud, theft, and official corruption. But he still answered for every porch he had stood on and every frightened owner he had helped drive away. The younger enforcer answered too. Pike lost his badge before the mud dried on his uniform. Voss spent his first night in a state cell complaining that Samuel had tricked him, as though a truthful deed and a rising creek were forms of deceit. Mara stayed at the cabin until a doctor finished bandaging Samuel's head and examining his knee. She placed the original deed in a fresh evidence sleeve, copied it twice, and arranged for one copy to remain in state archives. "Evelyn was right," she said. "About the stars. About greedy hands." The fire had blackened one wall of the boathouse and destroyed the old marine set. The cabin survived. Evelyn's letters survived except for the one Voss tore, and Samuel mended that page with clear tape at the kitchen table. Lottie refused to go home until the patrol cars had left. She sat in Evelyn's chair wrapped in a gray blanket and told Samuel that rescuing Voss had been a foolish use of good creek knowledge. Samuel said she was probably right. "You going to sleep?" she asked. "Eventually. You always say that." Near dawn, Mara returned from the landing with a small evidence receipt and told them the shell fragments had been photographed and sealed. The mussel bed, the tire tracks, and Voss's false affidavit placed him on Samuel's property before he claimed any lawful survey began. The shell had been small enough for a proud man to ignore and durable enough to outlast his lie. By sunrise, the creek had dropped below the first cypress root. Mist gathered over the blackwater. Samuel walked to the mantel with the tobacco tin in both hands. He opened it, removed the old service photograph, and studied Ray Mercer's face. For years he had hidden the picture whenever company came, as if grief were contraband and survival required an apology. This time he placed it beside the tin, next to Evelyn's repaired photograph. Ray remained young in the image. Evelyn remained laughing on the cabin steps. Samuel remained old, wounded, and alive. Those facts could occupy the same room. Lottie came through the door without knocking, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a plate of biscuits from the church kitchen. She looked at the photographs, then at Samuel, and said nothing. It was the kindest thing she could have done. Months later, land taken through Voss's forged surveys was returned or placed under review. The hidden road was closed by court order, and the landing became part of the evidence that broke open years of bribery in Bryer County. Samuel never attended the sentencing. Mara read the result to him at the kitchen table while Lottie shelled peas. When the county newspaper printed the story, it described medals, river rescues, and a Navy SEAL past Samuel had never used to impress anyone. The article missed the truer point. He had not won because he was stronger than 4 armed men. He won because he read their route, heard their fear on the radio, recognized false paper, protected a witness, preserved the truth, and refused to let private vengeance replace public judgment. After that, strangers sometimes drove slowly past the cabin, hoping to glimpse a legend. They saw a lean old man repairing nets under the pecan tree. Samuel gave them no performance. He kept the garden. He repaired the boathouse. On rainy nights, the Mekong still returned in pieces, but Ray's photograph no longer waited in darkness. The creek became quiet again, though Samuel knew quiet water was never empty. It held tracks, memory, and the weight of what men tried to hide. They knocked for the deed because they saw an old man alone in a cabin. By sunrise, Clayton Voss understood that some doors should never be opened by men carrying lies.